Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Young. I'm going to walk you through government policies for Mexico. Now, my presentation will be one perspective of Mexico. It's not deemed to be the only perspective, and you're more than welcome to go out to different websites from Reuters to Wall Street Journal, Bank of Canada, Export Development Corporation, or other sites to get a different perspective of Mexico, especially its economy, government policies, to understand what's truly going on there. A little bit bio about myself. I'm a CPA CGA by trade, but I have 25 years of experience across sections from academia to industry to financial solutions. So I'm going to talk about the Mexico government. I will talk a bit about GDP and then get a little bit more areas of the government policies from banking to taxation, infrastructure, and all that. Now, you can't start a conversation or end a conversation without talking about the governmental structure within a country. In the case of Mexico, they've had stable government for the last 4 years. What basically has happened there is the president Prieto has brought in a lot of reforms in key sectors like the financial service sector, education, telecommunication, and energy. The key idea was he wanted to bring more foreign direct investment into state-run companies, as well as basically allowing that diversification to happen in the economy to support growth. And he's really was promoting growth, and that's one of the things he's been able to do in certain sectors. The problem that he's found out now recently, some of the policies that he's focused on has not returned the foreign direct investment back, and some of that is like the key energy sector that hasn't really grown. And that's key aspect of when you look at the pinpoints of the structural changes he wanted to do, oil was one of those areas. However, Mexico has benefited in key areas like the automotive sector. They've seen a lot of investment in manufacturing, especially the automotive. And I'll get into more specific details about the economy, but the key aspect is he's made some improvements, but some of the other things that he's driven have not been as successful. And as Mexico approaches a new election, he hasn't been able to do a lot of the reforms that he said he was going to deliver, so his approval ranking has fallen by 9% in over a year. You kind of have to talk about Mexico, you have to talk about GDP. It's up 30% since 2006, but the key driver there, 80% of the economy is driven by exports. That's critical because if you're driven by exports, you're driven by dependencies on worldwide conditions of countries you're doing business with, whether that's Brazil, China, US, Canada. If they're going through periods of slow economic growth, that's going to have impact on your GDP because most of your GDP is driven by exports, and that's something to bear in mind. The Mexico economy is predicted for 2016 to grow between 2 to 3% this year. That's almost equal to where global growth is targeting. So your global growth is targeted at 3%. So Mexico is just below that, but it's almost close to where global growth is. Now, part of the reason that it's going to struggle is going to be based on the U.S. economy because Mexico is basically joined at the hip with the U.S. in terms of economic growth. You also have to talk about government deficits because certain governments are going around the world saying we need to spend more money. I haven't found any governments of the presentations I've done that are any governments that are in a surplus position. Most governments, revenues are under pressure, but they still are spending money as part of the overall fiscal management cycle. So that's something that's not truly grasped when people are talking about the issues. What they should be saying is what governments are in a surplus position and what are those debt to GDP ratios around the world. That's what should be discussed, and that hasn't been discussed. And Mexico's financial position is they have been in deficits for the past few years. When we talk about government, we have to talk about key policies from infrastructure, foreign direct investment, inflation, taxation rates. Mexico has done some work on modernization of infrastructure. It's still a critical issue that they still haven't modernized enough. So if you're making key business decisions, especially in Mexico, you're running into huge issues on infrastructure, and infrastructure can lead to productivity issues, and that's something to bear in mind when you're making investments, and that's something that's influencing Mexico's capability to be stronger economically. Foreign direct investment, Mexico has seen significant dollars come into its economy. Again, a lot of that has to do with the way companies are looking to bring jobs back, investment back to North America, and Mexico has seen that investment come back into their economy. Inflation, it's pretty good. They've done a good job of inflation. It's only 2.4%. Corporate tax rates are 30%, and its consumption tax are 16%. The banking sector in Mexico is very healthy and very strong. It's very well capitalized, and that's what you're seeing with this slide. When you go next to talk about government, you have to talk about corruption. Mexico is still up there in the lower tier in terms of countries where corruption is running rampant. Has the government tried to clean it up? Yes, it tried to bring in some new bills to bring more transparency, but Prieto hasn't been able to get those reforms passed. And that brings in a confidence issue with people, because how do you move an economy forward when you're still seeing corruption rampant through both state, municipal, as well as federal governments? And that's critical, and that's what you're seeing here as well. We also need to talk about trade in a nutshell with Canada and Mexico. We basically have significant amount of trade, in two-way trade of $34 billion in 2014. Now, the biggest issue is we have a trade deficit with Mexico. So despite having all these trade agreements, one of the critical drivers is either be in a surplus position with trade with a country, or be in a balance of zero. In the particular case with Mexico, we're in a deficit position. That's something, as we move forward to diversify exports, we have to find ways to close these gaps down. And Mexico is the key trading partner. As you see, since NAFTA came into play in 1993, its trade with Mexico, two-way trade, has grown by 650%. So it's a significant player in the export market and trade as we look at Canada's moving its economy forward as part of looking at foreign investment agreements, foreign investment protection agreements, as well as trade agreements. Now, this was only one perspective of Mexico. I've got other presentations in other countries, but it's kind of give you an idea that mainstream media hasn't been dealing with some of the issues that are domain to a country, some of the issues that are domain to an industry, and it's all about different policies in terms of moving economies forward. Most of what you're hearing about that's dominating the news is climate change. You are not hearing critical issues within countries that are driving challenges for those countries to move forward with modernization or create the conditions that will bring business investment in to help that middle class thrive. That's something that needs to be discussed more. These presentations I've done in each country gives you the political atmospheres, what's happening with these countries, whether they're left-wing governments or right-wing governments, what their policies are, and what those policies are impacting both domestically and internationally. I've done several different presentations on countries to get people an understanding of reforms, because people are going out there saying we need to spend money on economies that are sluggish. Well, you have to be smart how you spend that money. And the critical aspect is you don't just throw money to say you want to throw money at. What you need is you have to be targeted with those investments that make sense, whether that means more R&D to help bring products to market, whether that means expanding ports and rail systems that allow exports, whether that means closing down some of the gaps in different areas on environmental assessments. It's the whole gamut. And one of the key aspects here when we talk these policies and look at government, are they making the right decisions in critical aspects? Or are they being driven by some sort of other agenda? And that's something mainstream media isn't calling out enough about bad policy. Bad policies have ripple effects to an economy. Business cannot take a lot of pressure of bad policies. Bad policies put a lot of shock and awe to those companies. They have to make decisions. Where they invest money is based on that. So when you hear conversations made, that's something you need to discuss with your local politicians, whether they're municipal, provincial, or federal. You should never take anything at face value. So by going to a Mexico presentation gives you an idea what's going on in that country. It also tells you how important it is in terms of Canada and the global economy. And that's something that as you move forward and have that discussion, you should ask those questions. Thank you.